Have you ever met someone who noticed things everyone else seemed to miss? Maybe they sensed tension in a room before anyone spoke. Maybe they remembered tiny details everyone else forgot. Or maybe they kept asking questions that most people never even thought to ask. At first, those behaviors can seem unusual. Some people even call them signs of being different or rare. But psychology tells a far more interesting story. Psychology suggests these behaviors often appear together in surprising ways. They reveal something fascinating about how the mind works. So here's a question. What if some of the habits you've dismissed as just the way I am are actually connected by a pattern? In this video, we'll explore 7 behaviors that psychology finds genuinely fascinating. Some may sound familiar. Others might completely change the way you see yourself. But don't try to decide after the first one, because the final sign is the one that most people misunderstand. And if it describes you, it changes the meaning of everything that came before. Let's start with something almost everyone overlooks. Sign 1. Emotional radar. Picture this. You're sitting in a meeting. People are smiling. The conversation is flowing. On the surface, everything seems normal. Then something changes. One person's voice becomes slightly flatter. Someone else forces a smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes. Nobody reacts. But something inside you quietly says, something's wrong. Hours later, you're still thinking about that moment. Most people dismiss experiences like this as overthinking. Psychology offers another possibility. Some people naturally notice subtle emotional cues in expressions, tone, and body language. Rather than reacting to one obvious clue, their brains connect dozens of small ones into a pattern. Researchers often relate this ability to emotional granularity and social perception. The more accurately we notice emotions, the better we tend to understand both ourselves and the people around us. The downside? It can be exhausting. When your mind constantly absorbs emotional information, it's easy to wonder whether you're imagining things. Sometimes you are, but sometimes you're simply noticing what everyone else missed. So think about this. Have people ever asked, how did you know something was wrong? If they have, don't rush to call it overthinking. It might be one of the ways your mind naturally pays attention to the world, but noticing emotions is only the beginning. The next sign explains why some people leave conversations that others remember for years, even when they barely remember the conversation themselves. Sign 2. Unforgettable presence. Think about this. Have you ever had someone stop you months later and say, I still remember what you told me that day, and you honestly couldn't remember saying it? Most people assume memorable conversations happen because someone gave brilliant advice. Psychology suggests something different. People rarely remember every word. They remember how a conversation made them feel. Psychologists call this the peak end rule. Now here's the interesting part. Some people create those moments without realizing it. They ask one thoughtful question instead of 10 ordinary ones. They notice the hesitation before someone answers. They listen to understand, not simply to reply. When someone feels genuinely heard, their brain begins lowering its guard. They're more willing to share something real instead of repeating the same safe conversations they have every day. That's why a simple conversation with the right person can stay with someone for years. So if you've ever heard, I don't know why, but I feel like I can tell you anything, don't assume it's because you always have the perfect advice. Sometimes the most unforgettable thing you gave another person was your full attention. But here's where many people become confused. The next sign often feels like a weakness while you're living through it. In reality, it may be one of the clearest signs that your mind processes the world differently. Sign 3. The quiet observer. Have you ever been surrounded by people you genuinely like, yet still felt like you were standing just a step outside the conversation? Not because anyone excluded you, and not because you wanted to leave. You were there, but a part of your mind was somewhere else. While everyone else was caught up in the moment, you were quietly noticing the person who suddenly stopped talking, the joke that sounded forced, the awkward silence nobody seemed to acknowledge, wondering why you reacted the way you did. If that feels familiar, psychology offers an interesting explanation. Some people naturally observe their own thinking. Psychologists call this metacognition, the ability to step back and observe your own thinking instead of simply reacting to it. That habit can become a real strength. It helps you notice patterns, question assumptions, and see situations from more than one perspective. But it also comes with a cost. When your mind is constantly observing, it's easy to feel slightly out of sync with people who simply experience the moment without analyzing it. That doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It may simply mean your mind is processing the world differently. So ask yourself this: have you ever left a perfectly good day wondering, why do I always feel just a little different? If you have, don't be too quick to see it as a weakness, because the next sign reveals something many people spend years misunderstanding about themselves, and it often shapes the biggest decisions they'll ever make. Sign 4, seeking consistency. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like something didn't add up, even though you couldn't explain exactly why? Maybe someone kept saying they were fine, but their tone sounded distant. Their smile felt rehearsed. Their actions quietly contradicted everything they were saying. Most people brush those moments aside, but some minds have a harder time doing that. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding conflicting information. For others, it lingers. Their brain keeps trying to solve the puzzle. Why did they say one thing, but do another? That's why you may find it difficult to accept excuses that don't make sense or stories that constantly change. It's not because you're naturally suspicious. Your mind simply keeps searching for consistency. Of course, this can become exhausting. Not every contradiction has a hidden meaning. Sometimes people are just tired. Sometimes they're stressed. Sometimes they're trying to protect themselves. Learning when to let go is just as important as learning to notice. But if you've often been told, you're reading too much into things, it may be because your brain naturally pays closer attention to mismatched signals than most people do. And surprisingly, the next sign has nothing to do with noticing other people. It's about what happens after life knocks you down. Sign 5. Safe presence. Have you ever noticed something strange? You meet someone for the first time. The conversation starts with small talk. A few minutes later, they're telling you about a mistake they still regret, a fear they've never said out loud, or a part of their life they usually keep hidden. And you're left wondering, why are they telling me all this? It happens more often than most people realize. Psychology calls this psychological safety. What's interesting is that this feeling usually isn't created by giving brilliant advice. It's created by something much quieter. Listening without rushing to respond. Being comfortable with a few seconds of silence. Being curious instead of fixing. Research also suggests that emotions can be contagious. When one person remains calm and emotionally present, it often helps the other person feel calmer too. Not because you had all the answers, but because, for a few minutes, someone felt completely accepted. So if people have ever said, "I don't know why, but I feel like I can talk to you," don't assume it's luck. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give another person is a space where they no longer feel the need to hide. But the next sign has nothing to do with how other people see you. It's about what happens after life hurts you, because the way you recover often reveals more about your mind than success ever will. Sign 6, hidden growth. Most people can point to a moment that changed their life, a failure, a heartbreak, a loss they never expected. For some, those moments become something to escape. For others, they quietly become something to learn from. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth. It doesn't mean pain is good, and it certainly doesn't mean everyone grows after difficult experiences. But research has found that some people, after working through adversity, begin to see themselves and the world differently. They become more intentional. They value relationships more deeply. They stop taking ordinary moments for granted. The experience doesn't erase the pain. It changes what they choose to carry forward. If you've ever looked back at one of the hardest seasons of your life and realized, I would never choose to go through that again, but it taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. You've experienced the kind of reflection psychologists have spent years trying to understand. Growth isn't forgetting what happened. It's refusing to let your worst day become your entire identity. And that leads to the final sign. Because after everything we've explored, there's one behavior that quietly connects all the others. Sign 7, depth over numbers. Here's one final question. If you had to choose, would you rather have a room full of people who know your name, or one person who truly understands you? For some people, the answer comes instantly, because they've never been interested in collecting friendships. They've always been searching for connection. Psychologists have found that we're naturally drawn to people who share similar values, ways of thinking, and emotional experiences. This tendency is known as homophily, and it's one reason certain conversations feel effortless, while others never move beyond small talk. If you've ever felt out of place in large groups but completely yourself with one or two people, there may be nothing unusual about you at all. You simply value depth over numbers. And once you stop measuring your life by how many people know you, you start appreciating the few who truly understand you. Maybe that's why some of the people you've connected with the most weren't the loudest or the most impressive. They made you feel you didn't have to pretend. Because the goal was never to prove that you're rare. The goal was to help you understand yourself a little better. And sometimes, that's far more valuable. Before you leave, I want to leave you with one final thought. If several of these signs felt familiar, don't rush to conclude that you're rare, and don't dismiss them as meaningless either. Psychology isn't about putting people into boxes. It's about giving us better questions to ask about ourselves. If today's signs felt familiar, I hope they left you with better questions, not better labels. None of those things define who you are, but together, they might reveal something about how your mind naturally experiences the world, and I think that's far more valuable than any label. If this video helped you understand yourself, or someone else, a little better, I'd love to know which sign stood out to you the most. Not because there's a right answer, but because every perspective adds something new to the conversation. And if you're curious about the psychology behind the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors we all experience, but rarely stop to understand, consider subscribing, because that's exactly what we'll keep exploring here. Until next time, stay curious.